tonight about other cities that are doing really interesting work. My name is Jane Demner, and I'm the Director of Community Planning for the Columbia Association. And on behalf of the Columbia Association, I welcome you. I also want to say that tonight's event is co-hosted by Bike Maryland. Carol Sildorf is here, and I want to thank you very much for your support. And tonight we have in our latest in our speaker series. How many of you have come to other events as part of our speaker series? Very good, excellent. So I think this is the fourth speaker we've had in our community building speaker series. And tonight we are fortunate to have Jennifer Toole with us to talk about the path forward cycling innovation across the United States. Jennifer is first a Columbia resident, and I say that because that's wonderful for all of us to have that kind of expertise in the community. And Jennifer is a nationally known expert in pedestrian and bicycle planning and design. She's worked here in the region in the big cities like Washington and Baltimore. She's our consultant for CA on our Connected Columbia project. She's worked around the country, Seattle, Boston, a lot of smaller places that are not as notable, who are doing a lot of work to make their communities more livable, more bikeable, and the people happier, healthier, and able to prosper because of the infrastructure that they're putting in or the programs that they're putting in to get people to be biking and walking more. Jennifer also has expertise in research, in guidelines, so she's both teaching us how to do our pathway standards more, as well as innovating on the ground. So we're just really fortunate to have her. Jennifer is president of Toole Design Group, which is a women-owned business with offices in 4 places across the United States. So I want to welcome Jennifer. It's a pleasure to have her. We'll have a presentation, and then we'll have some time for questions. Jennifer?
Good evening. Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many people out tonight. I want to thank CA and Bike Maryland for having me here to talk to you. I'm basically going to show you pictures of all the cool places that I've been to and bicycled in, some great towns and cities around the country. I'm going to be focusing on examples here in the United States. But what the gal in the video said is very true. We really learned all the best stuff from Europe. They're way ahead of us when it comes to building bicycle infrastructure and in getting people to shift from the automobile mode over to bicycling. And so, but we're starting to get smarter about it in this country. And cities and towns all over the country are improving conditions. And the other thing that I'm going to attempt to do is to show you some places that are more like Columbia. I can show you a lot of pictures of what New York City's doing. I do have some pictures of New York City, but that's quite a different environment than Columbia. So I want to show you some things from places that are similar to here. Okay, and I'll just start by saying I moved to Columbia about 15 years ago, and I've raised 3 kids here, taught them, all 3 of them to bike. Well, the third one doesn't bike quite yet without training wheels, but here in Columbia, and I think it's a place that has so many possibilities. I think we can achieve the same kinds of things that we saw in Boulder. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Boulder because I think it's a great example. But I wanted to start just by saying, why is there so much interest in this topic now, today, throughout the United States? Everywhere I go, communities are really, really intent on making conditions better for bicycling. And part of it, I think, is we've got a lot of worries in this country. And we're worried about the condition of our health. We're more sedentary now than we ever were in history. And it's causing a lot of health problems. We're worried about the health of our children as well. We're worried about the environment. We're worried that by designing a transportation system where you really have no other choice but to get in a car for every trip, that we're causing damage to our environment. We need to find ways to fix that. We're worried about our safety. We're realizing that we've designed a system that people can't even cross the street without fearing for their life. And then there's some interesting trends happening in transportation. Of course, we know gas costs a lot more, so it's becoming an economic issue. People can't afford to drive their car for every single trip. Young people can't afford to buy a car. And then this last thing is one of the most interesting things, and that's that Americans are driving less than they used to. And that is really causing a lot of ripples in the transportation world. It's the first time this has happened in history. Next slide. And so let's talk about this a little bit more. This is this chart that shows vehicle miles traveled in the United States. And you can see that VMTs, what we call it for short, peaked in 2004 and have been going down ever since. Now, so ever since the automobile was invented, this line was going up. And what's very significant about this is that we expected this to keep going up forever. And in fact, we designed our transportation system with that understanding. For everything from how wide we built roads to where we needed to build roads was based on the theory that people would drive more and more and more. And that's turning out to not be true. Now, when it started going down, people said, oh, it's just an anomaly. You know, this is not really going to continue. It's just because of high gas prices. And as soon as they come down, it'll go back up again. Well, it's not. This trend has now been in place for 6 years. So we're beginning to realize that this may be here to stay. Okay, this is another very interesting trend. And when you say, well, what's the reason why we're driving less? Part of it is because Generation Y is not as interested in driving automobiles as they used to be. Young people used to drive a lot more than they do today. In fact, my generation, Generation X, was much more in love with the automobile than this next generation is. So if you look at what they're doing, they're taking a lot more bike trips, 24% more bike trips than they took in 2001. They walk more, about 16% more than they did just 8 years ago. And then the last one is really significant. They like to take public transit. Now, there are a lot of theories about why this is true. Some people think it has a lot to do with the graduated licensing laws. It's a little bit harder now to get your driver's license than it used to be. It may also be because it's more expensive to own a car, and this generation just can't afford to. Some people think it's because you can't update your Facebook status in the car, and so it's much easier to do those things on public transit. But whatever the reason, this next generation doesn't like to drive as much. And so that's a very significant transportation trend that is very positive and something that we expect to continue. Okay, so what's the goal? I think it's really important to think about who the audience is when you talk about increasing bicycling and what we need to build to increase bicycling. And this is a chart that shows sort of the whole population and their opinions about bicycling. And it used to be that we mostly designed bike facilities for that small blue sliver at the beginning there, the strong and fearless. But then there's this second group in red that are folks that feel pretty confident on a bike. They're enthusiastic about bicycling, and you know, and may not bike every single day, but when they get a chance, they ride a bike. There's a very large group of folks, though, about 60% when you look at surveys, that are interested in bicycling and would like to be able to bike for some trips, but are very concerned about their safety. They're not really ready to go out and battle traffic, and they would try it if they had places where they felt safe doing it. And I would guess, raise your hand if you're in that group in this room. Okay, so maybe 60%. Okay, now there's a fourth group, and those are the people who, no matter what you build, they are not going to bike. They do not care about bicycling. They don't care about getting more exercise that way. They're just going to always just not be interested. So this isn't probably not our audience. Okay, so when we look at the trends among cities and towns that are improving bicycling, we see that many of them now are trying to focus on that group of interested but concerned bicyclists. And so they're working to provide what we call stress-free bicycling facilities. And so that includes things like pathways, trails, like the kinds we have here in Columbia. Also a type of facility called a cycle track, which is alongside a road, within the road right away, but a little bit more separated from traffic. They're providing bike lanes and bikeable shoulders and bike routes. And then the third thing that's really important too, and I think you probably heard a lot of this in that video, is encouraging a bicycling culture. Holding events where you're encouraging people to get out on bikes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Okay, so I said that I would show you at least a few pictures of New York City. And this is, so these are, among the big cities, these are the ones that are really innovating when it comes to designing bikeways. And this is a picture, raise your hand if you've ever been down 9th Avenue in New York City, the bikeway on 9th Avenue. Okay, it's a pretty famous bikeway. They built that bikeway by taking off a lane of traffic off of 9th Avenue, which was not a very popular decision. Some people are still mad about that. But it is, what's significant about this shows you sort of the theory of a cycle track. So this is the bikeway. It's a one-directional bikeway. And this is a line of parked cars. Okay. So this is a line of parked cars. This is a turn lane. At the intersections, they control the traffic, so there's not a conflict between bicyclists going straight and cars that are turning. And so that is a type of cycle track. Next slide. I want to point out that I think really one of the top innovations when it comes to improving conditions for bicycling is this type of treatment called a road diet. It's a term that's used to describe a situation when you have more lanes than you need on a road. And we have a lot of roads like this. We built them expecting those volumes to go up and up and up and up. Well, sometimes that didn't happen for whatever reason. And so we have all over the country and here in Columbia roads that are wider than they really need to be for the amount of traffic that they carry. And so it's a real simple concept. This is a 4-lane road. It turns into a 3-lane road with a center turn lane and bike lanes. This doesn't just benefit bicyclists. It's also been shown to reduce motor vehicle crashes. As you can imagine, this guy turning here, these folks back behind here might not notice that he's waiting to make a turn. And so you get a lot of rear-end crashes on 4-lane roads, 4-lane undivided roads. So that is probably the single most important innovation around the country. This is how communities are getting bike lanes. They're not widening roads to add bike lanes. It's very rare that a community widens roads. They're looking for extra space in the street system. Just a few more pictures. The other thing that is happening, started happening in cities and now is starting to trickle down to towns of all sizes, is the use of colored pavement in bike lanes. And it's just another way to draw attention to that space as being special. In New York City, they use it to keep people from parking in that space, because their biggest problem is that any leftover space that's not being used gets parked in. This over here is Portland, Oregon, and they use it especially in conflict zones. So you have a situation here where you have drivers that turn across this space, which is getting ready to become a cycle track as it continues. Turns from a bike lane into a cycle track. And so that is a conflict zone, and they use the green to indicate to motorists to be careful in that space. Portland is also using green in bike boxes. This is another type of innovation. And so this is a bike box. And what its purpose is to provide bicyclists, especially in a busy street, where it's difficult to merge over through this traffic to take a left-hand turn, to provide them a way to come up and during a red light position themselves to make that left-hand turn from there. So that's another type of innovation. Not for everywhere. It's for special places where you need that type of, bicyclists need that help. This is Boston, Massachusetts, and it shows another type of innovation that's being used in cities really of all sizes, and that's providing not just a bike lane, but a buffer. And this is especially important when you have fast traffic. So this is looking down on this facility from that bridge. And this is a particularly, the traffic that goes down and through this tunnel sort of thing is going very, very fast. And so this used to be 2 lanes of traffic. The way that we created that bikeway was by restriping it and providing that buffer from that fast traffic. Okay, and then these are just some more scenes from Boston. The use of green, Boston is using green bike lanes as well to help bicyclists navigate through areas with streetcars, because those are places where you can very easily have a crash because of the tracks in the road. So not a problem that we have here in Columbia yet, maybe one day. But so let's talk a little bit about some communities that are more similar to Columbia. We're going to start with slide. We're going to start back with Boulder, because I think that the video was great, but it didn't really tell you how they were building some of those types of facilities. And I just wanted to do a little bit of a comparison. Boulder is the video makes it sound like a great place. It is a great place, but trust me, they have plenty of really wide roads. And so not every place is a perfect place to bike in Boulder. They have about the same population as Columbia does. Their median household income is about $50,000 a year. Ours is $95,000, so we're a little bit richer than they are. It's a bedroom community to Denver, has a university there, but it also has a pretty active, it has its own commerce as well, just like Columbia does. We have our own commerce, and we also have people who work in Baltimore and Washington. It was rated number 3 best place to live by Sun magazine. We were ranked number 2, so I see lots of similarities between our 2 communities. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about what's different. What do you notice about this bus stop that's nice? Right, it's got bike racks, so you can park your bike and lock it up, get on the bus if you don't feel like taking it along. They also have racks on their buses like we do. What else, Steve?
Away from the road.
Yes, it's set back from the road. Right, very nice.
bike trails that you talked about.
Yes, that's another key. So they've integrated their trail system with their transit system. So like the guy said in the video, he can travel without having to stop for a long distance, and it's integrated with their transit system. Next slide. This is a view of that path that you saw people riding on. And I think some things I wanted to point out about this is look at all the different types of users you've got here. You've got the guy who wants to go pretty fast, right? But you also have mothers with strollers. Of course, these pedestrians are not where they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be over here. And I'll just tell you, in general, it's hard to make this work unless you have a majority of people bicycling instead of walking. If the majority is pedestrians, then they're going to walk wherever they want to walk. But I've seen it work in cities where the majority of people are biking on that facility. But this is a very wide space. This is the underpass that was in the video. So this is about 10 feet wide, and this is about 10 feet wide. And so you got a total of 20 feet. And that's how they're able to accommodate these different types of users with fewer conflicts. I wouldn't say there's no conflicts. They're still having to operate in the same space, but that's a key. Another thing that I wanted to point out that I think is significant about Boulder is that their trails do join roads at certain locations, and they have paid very close attention to how those junctions occur. And one of the things that they do is they're very intent on slowing down traffic at those connections. And so they provide a raised crossing. So the bicyclist or the pedestrian is up at this level, and the driver has to go over it's a very gentle bump, but it's still a bump, and it really has an effect on drivers. It causes them to slow down at those locations. And then they have these kinds of signs to remind drivers to look both ways for different users. This is one of Boulder's cycle tracks. This is it's on the edge of their downtown, and a very important route connecting to housing in a way that a lot of people get to they have a very small downtown. And so you can see this is a separated space from the rest of this street. Go to the next slide and I'll show you another view of that space. So this is what it looks like going the other direction. And you can see that's a very safe feeling space. It's very protected from traffic. One of the things that I'm always amazed by in Boulder is the number of kids on bikes. You can tell that parents feel safe letting their kids ride bikes in Boulder. And I think it's because of facilities like this. They do some fun stuff too. I like their bike parks. This is a pretty subtle message. Bikes park free. They have a lot of bike racks, plenty of places for people to park their bikes. Next slide. And in locations where they're really convenient. They're close to the shops and not off in a corner where you feel like, if you leave your bike there, it might not be safe. So they have a lot of bike lanes. I don't want to leave the impression that all of their facilities are separated. They've got a lot of on-street bike lanes that they've created over the years. Next slide. And they also use shared lane markings. This is something that we're using around the country more and more. And it's in locations they didn't have enough space to put a bike lane in on this street. But it's still an important street for their bike network. And they want to remind drivers that bicyclists are going to be there. And they also want to remind bicyclists not to ride too close to these cars, right? You see that happening right there? That's a car door opening. So one of the worst types of crashes you can have as a bicyclist is to run into a car door that's opening. And so we want to encourage bicyclists to position themselves correctly in the street so that that doesn't happen. Okay. So I thought I'd just share with you what Boulder has been able to accomplish. They do have quite an impressive bike mode share, 10.5%, and good and really good walking mode share as well. You can see this is the national average of the bike mode share. That's where we are, folks. And this is what Boulder has been able to accomplish. Very similar community in size to Columbia, not as wealthy as Columbia, but has been able to 10% of their commute trips are by bike. So, next slide. Okay, let's talk about another city, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And Minneapolis is a bit bigger than Columbia. It's about 3 times our population, almost 4 times. Again, median income, $44,500 a year. So again, not as wealthy as we are here in Columbia. A very multicultural community, very similar to Columbia in that respect, I think. And a lot of snow. So you would think, you know, maybe Minneapolis can't really pull this off. It snows most of the year. They have plenty of wide streets too. What I think is really significant about Minneapolis is they have an amazing trail system, just an incredible network of trails, and that it extends all throughout the city and takes you to destinations, takes you right into town, basically. Next slide. You can see this is just a typical Saturday in Minneapolis. I was there last summer, and there's just an amazing amount of bicyclists. I've never seen so many bicyclists out than I saw that Saturday. Definitely outnumber pedestrians on these trails. They're built in former rail corridors, so they're very flat. So it's a very comfortable place to bicycle. Just to show you, give you a sense of width, these are pretty wide trails. That each of these lanes are 7 feet wide, and then they have another 5 foot wide area for pedestrians. And you know, there's just, these trails are really long, and most people would prefer to bike on them, I think, than walk. But they have successfully pulled off this sort of separation of traffic, this separation of bikes from pedestrians, because the majority of the users are bikes. This is just another view of that trail a little further down. This is the Midtown Greenway. It goes right through the heart of Minneapolis. It's an old railroad line that's lower than the streets above it. And now businesses that are redeveloping along this corridor are opening up back to the trail. And it's really an amazing facility. Next slide. This is a pit stop that is literally right next to the trail. Here's the Midtown Greenway. And this is a place where you can get bike gear. You can buy a bike here if you want to. You can store your bike. You can get something to drink or to eat here. And so it's supporting local business as well as providing a commuting facility. This is the Savo Bridge. And one thing about Minneapolis is that it got a lot of money. Got a federal funding grant of $20 million to help build some of the bike infrastructure. But I'll tell you that it was a drop in the bucket compared to what the city was already spending on bike infrastructure. So this bridge was about $5 million. It was a really critical connection in their bike network. You can see that the road that it crosses is a really busy road. So it was a significant gap, and something that that really shortened trip distances for a lot of people, so it gets used a lot. And this is just a view of some of their on-road facilities. They have been doing some innovative stuff with use of green. You know, I showed you the picture of the shared lane marking where you don't have enough space for a bike lane. This is a way of marking that area right in the middle of the travel lane. Again, to just raise awareness that this is a place where people bike. And the impact that it has is that drivers tend to go slower on that street because they're sharing that space with the bicyclists. It's trying to reinforce that sharing behavior that's supposed to happen anyway. So this is just another view of one of their buffered bike lanes downtown. Okay, so let's talk about what they've been able to accomplish. Minneapolis set a goal to increase bicycling by 60% in 7 years. A really ambitious goal. They set that back in 2007, and they do a lot of bike counts in Minneapolis. So they're counting bikes every year. Well, they are on track to increase bicycling by 60%. So they're already actually ahead of themselves. So it's quite significant. Okay, and just one more picture. Not everything that they've done is successful. You know, I think one of the things to point out about these communities is that they experiment a lot. And sometimes what they experiment with doesn't work. Honestly, this is, in my opinion, was one of them. The green material they used was really not easy to see and faded very quickly. So that's another common thing is the willingness to experiment with different ways and different treatments for bikes. Another thing that's important about Minneapolis is that they have a bike share system. And this is the bike. It's called Nice Ride Minnesota. And they have about 1,000 bikes and 138 stations. It's been in operation for about 2 years. And that's certainly something else that any community that's really innovating is looking at doing is bike share. So, next slide. Okay, next community I want to talk about is Madison, Wisconsin. Madison is a town that has plenty of wide roads. It's not it's got plenty of 4-lane roads and has a downtown core and then a fairly sprawling area outside of the downtown. The median income is $42,000 a year, and it's another place that's very snowy. Next slide. I think some of the interesting things about Madison has been their work to make sure that their trails are accessible to everyone. And so this is just an example of a project that they did to reduce a steep slope, a steep connection to one of their trails up to a street. And this is something that's very common, I saw as well in Minneapolis. These are pretty expensive projects, and they don't all happen right as soon as a trail is built. Sometimes there are things that an agency might come back and do later. But it's pretty important. People who are new to bicycling feel very uncomfortable going up and down really steep hills. In fact, I think it's one of the things we're struggling with here in Columbia. We have a lot of very steep slopes on our trail system. And so these are the kinds of projects that are done to make those slopes a lot more gentle for bicyclists. The other thing that Madison has some great trails, just fantastic trail system. Also, a number of trails on former rail corridors. And this is an example of a treatment through a really difficult intersection as you get closer to their downtown. And this, I don't know if you can see, the trail continues across there. You know, it's a classic, the railroad keeps going straight, right? And bicyclists were trying to get through this intersection in all different crazy ways. In fact, because of the way the signal is timed, going this direction to get there is a really bad way to go. But not all cyclists realize that when they reach that intersection. And so this green pavement treatment was used to help direct them through that busy intersection. So that's another thing that I think Madison really has done a great job at, and that's making sure that bicyclists don't feel abandoned at intersections. Intersections are scary places for bicyclists. You know, sometimes the signal doesn't work. Doesn't matter how long you sit there. You can't make the signal turn. Sometimes it's just not clear where the right place to stand at an intersection is with respect to all the other traffic. And so Madison's done a lot of work to make signals work better for bicyclists. This is just a location where bicyclists are allowed to come through this intersection, but cars are not allowed to go out that direction. So, so they had to provide a way for bicyclists to trip the signal. So that's the reason for that little arm that's sticking out there. There's plenty of examples in Madison of, you know, left turn lanes for bikes. And in general, they've just done a very good job directing bicyclists through intersections. This is one of Madison's sort of very important bikeways. It leads directly to the university. It's a very, very busy road, about 40,000 vehicles a day. This is a exclusive bike lane. This is a bus lane. This is about 8 feet wide. And it's a one-way street, as you can see. So what they've done is they've built a counterflow bike lane in the other direction. And that was important because in order to go the other direction legally with the other one-way street pair, you had to go down a very steep hill and back up a very steep hill. So bicyclists weren't doing it. They were riding the wrong way on the street. So this is what it looks like at street level. And you know, the key to making facilities like this work is designing the intersections well. You know, you have a user coming from a different direction than anybody else. So it makes the intersections very complicated. They have to be carefully designed. This is another picture of Madison. It just shows some of the structures that they've designed to get bicyclists across barriers, eliminate gaps, a pit stop area for bicyclists with water, and then a map so that you know where you are in the system. It's very important to be able to navigate. Not everyone's carrying a map with them, so it helps a lot. And then when it comes to bike culture, Madison, like a number of other cities that have really improved biking conditions, they have days when the roads are closed off, certain streets are closed off, and people can go out and bicycle on those streets. Cyclovia is the term for that, and something that gives people a chance to try out bicycling and not have to worry about traffic. And in a place, you know, roads are fairly flat, so it's a really good way to learn to bicycle again. And I also, you know, I'm focusing more on bicycling aspects, but each one of these cities have also done a lot to improve pedestrian conditions, and Madison is definitely one of those as well. They have a lot of, they have safe routes to school programs at their schools, and this is just one example of an improvement that was done for that program. Okay, the last one I'm going to profile is Washington, D.C. It's not a place that's exactly like Columbia, but it's so close to home, and I'm going to show you some pictures of things that you could go down and look at yourself this weekend if you're interested. So, some facts about DC and some of the accomplishments. of Washington, D.C. They have a very active bike share program. If you haven't had a chance to go down and try it, I really encourage you to do it. It's very easy. All you have to have is a credit card, and you can buy for $7. You can rent a bike, and you can use it as long as you want to. It starts costing more the longer you use it, so just be aware of that. They have 1,300 bikes around the city as part of that system, and they are expanding it as well. And so pretty much anywhere downtown, you can actually go online and find out where the stations are. But any of the downtown metro stops, most of them have bikes. They're also putting them on the mall as well this summer. They have 50 miles of bike lanes, and those have mostly been built in the last 7 years or so. They have 64 miles of neighborhood bike routes, and then they have also a good system of, that stress-free bike facilities. The cycle tracks, 3 miles of cycle tracks. 15th Street is a cycle track that you can go down and see in Washington, D.C. And 56 miles of pathways throughout the city. The other thing the city has been very good about doing is installing bike racks throughout the city in the public right-of-way. And so it's another very important aspect of bike-friendly communities. Okay, I just wanted to show you one important facility. This is a fairly innovative bike facility in DC. It's on 16th, if you go to 16th and U Street, this is an intersection that was a really difficult intersection, but a very important bike route, and a place where bicyclists were really in danger because of the conditions and how complicated the route, the intersection was. So this is a one-way street. This is New Hampshire Avenue. New Hampshire Avenue is a diagonal street that comes together right at 16th and U. So it's, you have a diagonal street coming into a gridded street intersection. So this is a counterflow bike lane. Bicyclists were already doing this because it's really the best way to go north. And so this just formalizes that movement. Think of it as a two-way street for bikes and a one-way street for cars. Okay, so when you get to the intersection on that counterflow lane, there's a signal. You can see it just right there. This is a blow-up of that signal. It tells the bicyclist when it's safe for the bicyclist to go. And see if there's another slide of this. No. Okay, so back up. So when that signal changes to green, all of the traffic in the intersection is stopped. It's an all stop. And the bicyclist has time to get across the entire intersection before any cars are allowed to go again. So that's the way it works. It still needs some tweaks. Like I said, that a lot of times cities experiment with things and they don't quite turn out the way they thought they would. And so the city's planning some other things to improve that intersection. But it's certainly one of the types of innovations that we've seen around the country. Another thing that DC has pioneered is using reverse angled parking. So most people, when they park in an angled parking space, it's a head-in, front-end parking. And so by turning that around and making it reverse back into the space, it makes it much better for bicyclists. And the reason is because now these drivers, say that driver is getting ready to pull out, he has a very good view of the bicyclist coming down that bike lane. So, and there's a lot of other benefits to reversing that, doing reverse angle parking as well. So, and then finally, I just want to say, we're showing some of the busier streets where we have, more complicated traffic conditions. But most bicycling happens on quiet streets that don't really need anything to be good places to bike. I think that's very true here in Columbia. We have a lot of great streets that sometimes you don't know where they lead. That's part of the problem. Is, you know, they might benefit by some signage, but they're great places to ride. They feel comfortable. They really don't need bike lanes. Traffic's going slow. And so in every city that has done, that has developed bike networks, a portion of that network is on these types of streets. Next slide. And there are lots of signs available that we can use to sign bike routes. These are used all over the country. And that's the kind of thing that you can use on those quiet streets. You don't need that much more than a sign. And signs are pretty cheap. So. Okay, so back home to Columbia. I just wanted to close by saying I think that, you know, we have a lot going for us here in Columbia. We have 94 miles of pathways. They're showing their age. They're 40 years old. Some of them are you know, they were built during an era when we didn't have design standards. Those wonderful paths that you saw in Boulder, Colorado were built more recently. And so back when our paths were built, we didn't have those standards. And so it'll be important to take a look at how we can make improvements. And that's part of the project that Jane and the Columbia Association are doing and that we're working on. So we're really excited to be part of that. And so anyway, I want to thank everybody for having me out tonight, and I'll take questions.